Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. So excited for this video as we're going to discuss the Indiana Pacers, who have been one of the bright spots in the NBA this season. They've just been playing really great basketball, specifically with MVP candidate, All-NBA first team candidate, point guard Tyrese Haliburton, who is one of the most valuable players in the league, one of the best players in the league, period. And I've been super impressed with him, not only this year, but pretty much since they've acquired him. Rick Carlisle has done a really great job putting the ball in his hands, allowing him to work. I'm actually in the process of working on something myself where it's going to really display his value to the Pacers, where he might be even more important than a guy like Luka Doncic is to the Dallas Mavericks, which sounds crazy to say, but honestly, some of the numbers suggest that, which is just crazy. And it's a really great sign that the Pacers are playing so well this year. Obviously, a very crushing loss to the Milwaukee Bucks with a lot of drama. But this team is really, really good. And I think that they are one of the focal points of NBA basketball, not only this year, but moving forward throughout Tyrese Haliburton's career. I said at the moment that they acquired him via trade with the Sacramento Kings. He's the type of player other stars will want to play with, and that's exactly what this video is about. We're going to dive into the Indiana Pacers cap table. We're going to look at their multi-year cap, see, hey, what kind of pathways do they have of improving both now in the short term and long term as well. What types of players would fit around Tyrese Haliburton and Miles Turner specifically, and how do the Pacers go about getting those guys? They've got a lot of flexibility. They've got a lot of pathways of improving their roster, and I'm really excited to talk about them. If you guys do enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, so that way you don't miss out on future uploads here. If you're a Pacers fan as well, you got to go check out the mock draft that came out just a couple of days ago. You guys have 2 first-round picks currently, so make sure to go check that one out as well in case you're interested on who your team could potentially land in the draft. Without further ado though, let's jump into the cap table this year. And we got some two-way guys in here. Oscar Tshiebwe just scored his first career NBA basket. That's a part of the drama there with Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Milwaukee Bucks. But you've got some interesting two-way guys. Kendall Brown, who I liked, he came out of Baylor. Isaiah Wong out of Miami. These are 3 good two-way players who I think honestly all have characteristics that would define NBA players. So you've got pieces, which this is really important for what I'm going to say throughout the video, that I think could step up in the event that you thin out the roster via a couple of moves, because that's a real possibility. Then one of the big questions here is, what does free agency look like for the Indiana Pacers in the near future? And they've got some big questions ahead of them. The guy they traded for, Obi Toppin, I think he's done a lot of really nice things for him, playing as a starter for really the first year of his career, and he's been scoring the basketball very well. I highlighted in the offseason how great of a fit he would be next to Haliburton and the high-paced Pacers offense. I think he's done a lot of really nice things for them. Now defensively, you're still kind of waiting to see more, especially, you know, kind of at the point of attack. I think he just feels a little unnatural in that, and he doesn't have the size of a typical center. So I think Rick Carlisle has done a very good job being creative and trying to utilize him, utilize his skill set, but it's kind of a tough challenge just given his frame and size and everything that he presents as a player. And he's headed into restricted free agency, which is a big question for this team, is what does an Obi Toppin contract look like if they give him one? Will they wait for him to get an offer from another team, or will they flat out pay him themselves? That's a big question. Jordan Nwora is headed into unrestricted free agency. I'm not sure he's a big part of the Pacers' future, although he has had some moments in his short stint there, kind of dating back to last year specifically. Buddy Hield, this is a big question. They kind of started the year with him out of the starting lineup, moved him back into the starting lineup. It's pretty clear that Buddy's ability to play with Tyrese Haliburton is unmatched. He's a really great screener, which you typically don't think of for kind of a smaller shooting guard, but his ability to kind of flare out his screens, it's just really valuable. So listen, he's not going to get $19 million a year on the open market. So the question is, if they do retain him, which I think they should because he's a really good fit next to their best player, what does that number look like? Is it closer to 10, 11, 12 million dollars? Is it even less than that potentially because of kind of some of his defensive limitations? That's a big question. But Buddy Hield, to me, I think a player that I would want to keep around, just given how well he's played with Haliburton through their tenures together in Indy, obviously played together in Sacramento as well. There's some comfort level there, and I think it's an important player. But when we're looking at the cap flexibility for this team, here's the thing. With Toppin and Hield, 2 players that I individually like, 2 starters right now on the team, you say, oh, we got to have those guys back. it's possible the Pacers would pivot off of them for a couple of reasons, which would open up some money on their cap holds. You see Buddy Hield's cap hold is actually pretty significant. Obi Toppin's expected cap hold is fairly significant as well. So it's possible that they look in different directions, honestly. When it comes to trying to find ways to save money, that might be a way. Andrew Nembhard's on a super good cheap contract, so is Ben Shepherd. These two guys, you could basically lock them in. The Pacers are not going to move off of either of these two guys unless it's in some big type of trade. We're going to talk about some of those options here in just a little bit. Jalen Smith's a tricky one. I know a lot of people really like Sticks. He does some very nice things. He's had some really impressive moments this year. He's also been out a little bit with injury as of late. I think Smith's a good player. $5.4 million is not expensive for him, but with what we're going to talk about in this video, which is kind of free agency options and how would they go about operating with cap space again this offseason, $5.4 million might be a lot, and Smith might opt into that. I would probably expect him to, honestly. And it's a tradable contract, which is one of the benefits here for Indy. So many of their players are tradable because they're on team-friendly deals. Jarace Walker at $6.4 million roughly next season. Obviously, the kind of expectation would be that he's around, and he's partially what makes a guy like Obi Toppin maybe expendable in that situation. Benedict Mathurin, I think this is the player that Pacers fans are still waiting for that big jump from. You know, had a fantastic rookie season. Everyone started telling me, oh, you were way too low on him. I had him ranked 6th on my board in the 2022 NBA draft, and I feel pretty vindicated in that just with how things have played out so far. Hasn't really taken that big sophomore leap yet. He's shown flashes. He's a talented player. I think for him it's just kind of coming down to, okay, what is he defensively, and then what does his decision making look like with the live dribble? That's a, you know, it's still a big question for him, and that's some of what I was concerned about with him coming out of Arizona. And then also, what's the catch and shoot numbers going to look like for him this year? I think a little up and down still. You're still waiting to see that consistency, and if you find it with Mathurin, he's a heck of a player. But I think it's just night to night. You're not exactly sure what you're going to get. Aaron Nesmith, talk about night to night knowing what you're going to get. This guy is super reliable, and on a very good deal. 3-year, $33 million extension for a player who defends and shoots. A lot of teams around the league like that. When he came out of Vanderbilt, I was very, very high on him. Never really got his run in Boston, but Indy's been a nice home for him. Miles Turner's on a good contract, obviously very short term though, so that might be a concern for Indy. And then really this is the big one right here, this conglomeration of pieces right in here. TJ McConnell, let's start with him, $9.3 million. He only has $5 million guaranteed. Now, I think he's a big part of the culture right now in Indiana, so a lot of Pacers fans will understand if in the comment section say, we can't trade TJ McConnell. He's kind of like a really big-time uplifting piece to the team, and he's played some good basketball this year. So I completely understand that perspective, but when it comes to some of their long-term financial flexibility, a TJ McConnell trade might make some sense for them. I'm just going to say that. Isaiah Jackson. I really like this guy, but kind of the same situation with Jalen Smith. If you're trying to open up money to get something done, $4.5 million plus $5.5 million is about $10 million. And when you can combine those two contracts into maybe upgrading your roster somehow, I know it doesn't seem like shedding $5.5 and $4.5 million does a lot for you. It might if you do the two moves together, which is something, again, to consider. I like Ajax, I like Sticks. It just might be something the Pacers consider if there's a pathway for them to get a star, which is exactly what this video is about. Bruce Brown, this is really the big one here with Haliburton. With Haliburton likely making All-NBA, this number is not going to be $35.5 million. It's going to bump up to about 42, 43, which kind of, you know, puts a little bit of stress on this franchise financially. If you just kind of do some rough math here, we're going to use the $5 million guaranteed mark for McConnell. You're looking at about $51 million for these three guys right here. Let's exclude Brown for now. You're up to about $72 million with Miles Turner, about $83 with Aaron Nesmith, $90 with Benedict Mathurin, $97 with Jarace Walker roughly. You're looking at about $103 with Jalen Smith, $105 with Ben Shepherd, and $107 million with Andrew Nembhard, and that's before we even get into the cap holds on guys like Obi and Buddy Hield. $107 million, which means if you basically renounce the cap holds on Obi Toppin and Buddy Hield and Jordan Nwora, you're looking at about $30 million in cap space before Bruce Brown's $23 million. And Bruce Brown's a key piece as well for this team. They don't want to just lose Bruce Brown. I think that they're very happy to have him. And I think that number you know, everyone freaked out about in free agency, I said, look, that's not a bad contract. They got a team option, keeps their flexibility open. They also have the pathway here of, you know, maximizing him and saying, hey, if we like him and we want to keep him around, you have another year to have him. And it's short term. It's not a bad contract at all. But this is where the question is. If you keep him, you're down to about $10-ish million in cap space, which is where maybe you have to make some of those tough decisions, like a Jalen Smith, an Isaiah Jackson, and even then, you're not really close yet. You're about $20 million in cap space. Moving off of McConnell gets you closer to like 26, 27-ish million dollars, and then even then, you're still a little bit of a ways away, whether that's, you know, like, and that's part of the problem with Haliburton playing so well. His number jumping this year likely is going to be very, very difficult for the Pacers, but I do think that if they were to ultimately pass on Bruce Brown's contract, which is a possibility, we could see this team in line for some of these players. And I want to look at 2024 NBA free agents because I think the Pacers are an actual sleeping dark horse, whether that's via free agency or via trade. And to be honest, if they were really smart, they could go out and do both, get the free agent first, make a trade after they have access to all of their draft picks. And they have got, like I said, matching contracts. They could throw in a Benedict Mathurin, who's an intriguing young player in a trade, and go get a guy maybe like an OG Anunoby. If that's something, whether that's through a sign and trade, whatever that may be, you might be able to figure something out there with like Mathurin, and who knows, maybe Bruce Brown's involved in something like that as well. There's ways that they can operate, but I wanted to highlight guys with players options. LeBron James is not going to be a realistic option for this team, but in the thumbnail you did see Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and right now the Clippers have something very interesting going on, and that very interesting thing is these two star players, their star wings, the dynamic duo, the entire thing that their roster is built around, have not extended, and it doesn't seem like they will extend this year before the contract extension deadline, which means that they will likely both dip their toes into unrestricted free agency. Now remember, Kawhi Leonard did that a couple of years ago as well, and he ended up re-signing with the Clippers. So it doesn't necessarily mean that George and Leonard are darting on Los Angeles, and in fact it seems like the two of them would prefer to be in SoCal. I'm not reporting here that they're going to leave, but if they were to leave, I think Indiana is one of the best spots for these two guys. One of the two, not both of them. I want to be very clear. The reason for that, first of all, Paul George has ties to Indiana. That's where he started his playing career. Now, I do know, yes, he gets booed back there, but I'm sure Pacers fans would be pretty forgiving if he chose them in free agency. And Kawhi Leonard was actually drafted by the Pacers and then traded to the Spurs on draft night for George Hill. Kind of the whole point of what I'm talking about here in this video is to highlight how Indiana has the pathway to opening up cap space. They have a player in Tyrese Haliburton who other stars are going to want to play with, and it's a really good free agency class for those two things to align. Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, even if they're not the most realistic options, I do think that there is a little bit of pressure here on the Clippers, who also have James Harden due for free agency as well. The Clippers could look like a drastically different team a year from now. Now, I'm not saying that they will, but they might. Now you might say, okay, well, what if it's not Paul George and Kawhi Leonard? Then what? Well, this is where a guy like OG Anunoby makes a lot of sense as a potential candidate here as well, because OG Anunoby played his college basketball with the Indiana Hoosiers. I think that he would be really a player that the Pacers would love to consider. They're looking to continue building their defensive identity. They want another guy who can hit some shots on offense. I think Anunoby at points in his career has flashed that. He's been an 18-point per game scorer multiple times throughout his career. He's not necessarily that true number 2 star, which is what the Pacers should be lining up to get. I've been saying that for a long time, pretty much since they got Haliburton, that at some point they're going to be able to line up to do that because they have all their draft assets. They have a lot of ways to get better. It just comes down to, how do they figure that out? How do they execute that? And OG Anunoby's a guy that I do like quite a bit for them, although it's not necessarily the big fish that they should go after. And I don't know if the big fish is out here in free agency other than the two Clippers guys. I think PG or Kawhi would be the big fish that would make the most sense next to Haliburton. You have your offensive engine in Tyrese, and then you have a play finisher, whether that's George off of catch and shoots, whether that's Leonard off of, you know, catch one dribble pull-ups and playing out of the mid-range area. And PG, like, the beautiful thing about both of those guys is they're so talented with the ball as well that they can almost operate as point forwards, not necessarily being playmakers for your offense, but being scorers for your offense. And I think it's very clear watching the Pacers, and I tweeted about this during the in-season tournament championship game, is just watching them. The Lakers were blitzing Haliburton on every single screen, And going through that, it just made it impossible for the Pacers to find consistency, find a rhythm, find a groove offensively, because when the ball was out of their best players' hands, they don't have another guy who can just go either get a bucket reliably, or they don't have a guy that you can trust making the right play. I think that's where Paul George would go, you know, a really long ways with his ability to handle, pass, shoot. He's an impressive talent. And I know Pacers fans are probably moaning and groaning a little bit, saying, we don't want Paul George back here. He didn't want to be here. I mean, if he chose you guys in free agency this cycle, I think that would not only say a lot about, you know, Tyrese Haliburton, I think it would say a lot about him maturing and wanting to win. And I think the Pacers are a team that realistically stars can look at and say, that's a chance for me to go there and win if you add me into the equation. Klay Thompson, not the player I would choose, but think about how good of a fit he would be. Early transition, awesome shooter, one of the best shooters to ever step foot in the NBA. Basically an upgrade over Buddy Hield if you want to look at it that way. Reports are saying he turned down a $24 million a year extension with the Golden State Warriors. So what does his money look like in free agency? Is he making north of $25 million? Is that worth it for the Pacers? I would probably steer away from that myself. But I do think it's worth sniffing around. And then, like I said, there's other players in free agency that they could consider, but I don't love the idea of it being like a Joe Harris or a Spencer Dinwiddie or a D'Angelo Russell or any of these types of guys. And listen, while these are good players, even Pascal Siakam, listen, he's a player that would be really awesome in Indiana. I don't think that they should settle for like a 2B type player. I really think that with everything that they have, the opportunity cost, everything that's set up here, they have their picks, they have pathway to cap space, they have to go for another 1A or a 1B type guy. Someone who is either a star on the same level of Tyrese Haliburton or a star who is similar to Tyrese Haliburton in terms of talent level. Not play style, but talent level. And I think if they do that, they're legitimately a team that could come out of the Eastern Conference on any given year, because you have an extremely smart point guard. And if you have enough talent around him, he's smart enough, he's selfless enough to make that work. And I think, you know, for a player who he's very good with the ball in his hands, he doesn't dribble the air out of the ball. And I think that's a really big skill for them to be able to operate with when it comes to their team construction. They can play fast, but they also are good in the half court because they have such a smart, cerebral player. And you're really just one top end piece away. Again, if we go back to the team here, a lot of good players: McConnell, Ijax, Haliburton, Brown, Turner, Nesmith, Mathurin, Walker, Jalen Smith, Ben Shepherd, Nembhard, Hield, Toppin are all guys that I would trust to actually play NBA minutes. I think Oscar Tshiebwe could be a solid player. I think Kendall Brown may be a really deep end role player. Like, they've got guys who can just flat out play. And because of that, they could afford to make a big trade. They could afford to send Mathurin somewhere in a deal. Like, it doesn't have to be free agency either, and that's a really essential point here. Let's say they're operating with about $30 million in cap space. You include Mathurin into a trade, you don't have to match money, because then you're operating with about $37 million in cap based on his number being kind of extracted out of your cap books. And then that opens you up to any big-time player. You know, I've touched on Zach LaVine. I think Zach LaVine would be an awesome player in Indiana. I don't know if it's worth the opportunity cost. I don't know if it's worth harboring his contract. I don't know if it's worth, you know, taking in a player like that to not get all the way to a championship contender. I think that while LaVine would make them better, while Pascal Siakam would make them better, while OG Anunoby would make them better, I don't know if it makes them better enough to really kind of value the cost at what it's likely going to be for some of those guys, especially when it comes to their cap numbers specifically. Their cap table is really pretty right now. They've got a top end guy and then a bunch of really good team friendly deals. You're looking at like their next most expensive contract taking up 16% of the cap, which is beautiful. That's really well done by Kevin Pritchard. Building a great team for really cheap is very tough to do. The Pacers have done that. They have a lot of flexibility because of that. Now it's about hitting on the right guy. And for me, the two guys that I would really say that they have to go get is Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. And if they're able to do that, they're a legitimate threat in the Eastern Conference to win a finals as early as next season, which is crazy to say. Just thinking about where this franchise was a year and a half ago. That's how good Tyrese Haliburton is. That's how good of a job Kevin Pritchard has done. I think Rick Carlisle has done a very great job coaching there. And I think ultimately the Pacers, you guys know I've been super high on them. I think that they are arguably a sleeping giant. I had a video coming out about the 76ers a few weeks ago, and I said, look, they're the sleeping giant in the Eastern Conference. I think the Pacers are well aligned to be in that same conversation because of Tyrese Haliburton, Miles Turner, and the other players on their roster, just giving them a lot of flexibility. Let me know down in the comment section below what player you think the Pacers should go after. Now, this video is mostly focused on upcoming free agents, but like I said, if there's a player that they love for a trade, they have the draft assets, they can really pull it off for any player in the league, really, that they wanted. Any player that's attainable, they could line up and go get. I would love to see it. I want them to go do it, and I want them to become one of the best teams in the league because they're super fun to watch, and I think they're one player away from really blowing the doors off of a lot of teams. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next utility sports video.